The wind cut your face like blades, and the freezing fog made every step a battle against the invisible. Timur squinted his eyes to see beyond the white fog that covered the plain. At 13 years old, he already understood that, in Yakutia, Siberia, the coldest village on Earth, stopping for a second could mean freezing alive at 1701 Fahrenheit. He carried a wooden stick in his hands and headed towards the frozen river to help his father check the traps. But something out of the ordinary made him stop. There, motionless on the ice, was a Yakutian horse. The animal was shaking slightly, with its hind legs partially stuck in a crack in the frozen river. The damp skin was already beginning to crystallize. Timur felt his stomach drop. He looked around, but there was only silence, and the snow covering everything like a funeral pall. The sound of his own labored breathing mixed with the sharp whistle of the wind. Timur sank his feet into the ankle-deep snow and approached slowly, his heart racing. The horse turned its head slowly, scared and tired eyes meeting his. It was one of the village animals, strong, resistant, but not even horses raised in the brutal cold of Yakutia were immune to traps like this. The boy knelt beside the animal and ran his gloved hand over its cold neck. The skin was so cold it creaked. His body shook not just from the cold, but from the urgency. Every minute there, the situation got worse. The horse wouldn't be able to get out on its own, and Timur couldn't carry him either. The pain in his fingers was already constant, as if needles were going through his hands. Even with traditional Yakutian clothing, the extreme cold seemed to penetrate every layer. The boy knew he needed to decide. Run back to the village and get help, risking losing the animal. Or try, right there, to get the horse out of the ice with what little you had. The wooden stick in his hands was fragile, but his heart was firm. He took a deep breath, his eyes filling with snow and fear. In that frozen part of Yakutia, where even time seemed to stand still, Timur did what no one expected from a 13-year-old boy. He stayed. The cold burned his skin, and time seemed frozen along with the horse. But Timur didn't back down. In that white silence, his heart was the one that beat the most. And there, in your city, does winter also test people's courage like this? Comment here what it's like to survive the cold where you live. Timur knelt next to the horse and stuck the stick hard into the ice, trying to break the crust that imprisoned the animal's legs. The wood shook in his numb hands, but he persisted. The dry sound of cracking ice echoed like a warning, and with each new blow, he felt the weight of the risk. The horse was breathing hard, and his eyes, even though exhausted, seemed to trust that boy. The snow thickened, making everything around it indistinct. Timur used his own body as a shield against the wind, leaning against the animal to keep it minimally warm. He remembered the Yakutian knife that his grandfather always took on hunts, and he missed that object now. Without tools, all he had left was willpower. He tried to pull one of his legs out, but the horse whinnied in pain and slipped again. Timur fell too, getting drenched in snow. He felt the moisture penetrate his thick clothes, and an icy shiver ran down his spine. He cried in silence, out of cold and frustration, but he didn't stop. He made a greater effort, hit the weakest part of the ice with his stick, and created a small opening. When the foot gave way, and the horse moved a few centimeters, he knew there was still time. Even if little, there was still a chance. He just needed to keep going. The sound of the ice giving way was followed by a new movement of the animal, now stronger. Timur dug his feet into the ground, steadying himself as best he could, and pulled with the last of his energy. The horse's hind legs finally let go, but the effort was so great that he fell to his knees in the deep, soft snow. The horse tried to get up, slipping, exhausted, with its body covered in ice and breathing heavily. Timur crawled towards him, hugged his neck, and stayed there for eternal seconds, feeling the almost extinguished heat of that huge, gentle body. The cold ripped through the exposed skin, and the sky was already taking on the dark blue tone of the nights in Yakutia. When he heard a dull noise coming from the south, he thought it was the wind, but it was the sound of sled boards on packed snow. A figure appeared in the fog. It was his father, bringing two neighbors. One of the fishermen had seen the boy going alone and returned to alert the village. Without saying a word, the men covered the horse with Yakutian fur blankets, heated with stones, and carefully secured it to the sled. Timur no longer felt his fingers, but his heart. It was beating like never before. He had done the impossible. In silence, his father hugged him tightly, like someone who understood everything without having to explain anything. With the horse tied securely to the sled, they began their return journey through the deep, deep snow. The silence was broken only by the sound of boards sliding and the wind whistling through the distant trees. Timur was covered with a thick blanket, and even with his face pale from the cold, he kept his eyes fixed on the animal, watching its every movement as if its life still depended on it. His father, at his side, walked in silence, holding tightly to the side of the sled. Each step towards the village was like a thread of hope sewn into the freezing darkness of the Yakutian night. When they arrived, the doors of the traditional Yakutian house were already open, and neighbors were waiting with cauldrons of hot water, clean cloths, and bowls of reindeer meat soup. The horse was taken to the stable, where the heat of the stones and the smell of heated straw created a makeshift shelter. Timur, still trembling, was placed near the stove, where the women covered him with more blankets and rubbed hot tea into his hands. Outside, his grandfather's horse breathed slowly but steadily, as if silently giving thanks. The old man arrived soon after, leaning on a hand-carved cane, and when he found out what had happened, he just approached his grandson, knelt down with effort, and with tears frozen in the corners of his eyes, handed him the Yakutian knife he had carried since he was young. He said just one sentence: "Now she's yours, because today, you were one of us." The snow continued to fall outside, silent and constant, as if it wanted to cover the world with a blanket of silence and memory. Inside the house, the heat from the wood stove made the air smell like burning wood and wet wool. Timur still felt the cold clinging to his bones, but something inside him burned like a live coal. Neighbors told old stories, remembering rescues, hunts, and winters that almost took entire families. And now, among these memories, a boy's courage became part of the village's history. The children looked at Timur as if he were different, and the older ones exchanged respectful glances with the grandfather, who didn't say much, but smiled as if he recognized the value of the inheritance that passes from generation to generation. Outside, the horse slept, breathing heavily, its body protected by the blankets and the heat of the surrounding stones. In the middle of the night, Timur left the house in silence. He walked to the stable, carefully pushed the door open and sat down next to the animal. They stayed there, the two of them, surrounded by the cruelest cold on earth, but united by something stronger. He passed his hand over the horse's neck and whispered, "You weren't left behind. Neither was I." In Yakutia, surviving is not about beating the cold. It's protecting what you love, even when everything freezes around it. The horse's warm breath filled the cold air of the stable, like a lingering promise of life. Timur placed his head on the animal's side and closed his eyes for a few moments, listening to the calm sound of its breathing, feeling the timid heat that came from that surviving body. Outside, the wind howled through the frozen trees like an ancient song of the land, and each gust seemed to remind you that in Yakutia, nothing is granted, everything is earned. The boy thought about what he had done, not with pride, but with a strange serenity. He now understood the silent weight that the men of the village carried on their shoulders. It was not bravery that defined them, but the choice to act when everything said to give up. He returned indoors as the sky began to lighten slightly with the pale blue of dawn. The soup was still steaming on the table, and his mother, without saying a word, pulled him close and covered his shoulders with a thick blanket. Nobody asked anything. In Yakutia, stories like Timur's spread without needing to be told. They live in the eyes of those who were there, in the breath of a saved horse, in the warmth of a lit cabin in the middle of the ice, and in the soul of a boy who that night became a living part of the frozen heart of Siberia. That morning, as the faint sun peeked out from behind the heavy clouds, Timur knew he would never see winter the same way again. And you? What is winter like in your city? Comment here, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who would face the cold for the one they love.